right? That's Aggie jokes. Yeah. In the North, they were Polish jokes.
Did we win against the Aggies, the U of H team?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. It was generic.
Really cool. I knew the Aggies were very
All right, I'm going to go out. All right, welcome back. We are on the 5th of 5. For those who are online, again, the handouts are online, so you can see them there. But again, and these should be posted at some point on YouTube as well. So if you missed any, they should be available. If you want to rehear it, I don't want anybody to hear my words twice, but if that's your passion, go for it. Yes, there you go. All right, so we have gone all over the world in terms of Jews and where they ran when they were expelled, and today we're heading eastward to the modern-day Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, Russia, and this is where they ended up going for a lot of Jews after the expulsion. It's not to say that Jews didn't populate these areas beforehand. As a matter of fact, we know that as early as 1030, there were reports of Jews living in westernmost Ukraine. All right, so it goes back quite a ways. But those are a handful of Jews. This is where the vast swaths of people start arriving. This new Ashkenazic community of Poland is a conglomerate. It's a conglomerate of exiles from the Sephardic world, from Austria, from Hungary, from Germany, from all the different places that they're being thrown out of. And it is a community that prospers greatly under the reign of Zygmunt I, who was 1506 to 1548, so the first half of the 1500s, who actively protects the Jews in his realm. He sees the economic benefit and welcomes them and affords them significant opportunities in terms of pro-Jewish policies. It is a golden age in Spain in which Jews have an autonomy they really have not experienced since Spain, for sure. What's that? What I said, yes, golden age of Poland. Yes, yes. I got to stop drinking in the morning.
Who was the king?
Zygmunt I. He ratifies a request to have 2 leading rabbis appointed to the post of provincial judges, and they're going to serve all of Poland. So he's putting into the hands of rabbis oversight of the population. Again, this is unique in the time. They're given the right to preside over a wide range of matters. So the right to perform weddings and issues, and divorces rather. I mean, again, we take some of that for granted in America, of course, but we don't take it for granted elsewhere in history. This self-rule is not just in terms of internal affairs, but includes civil issues such as the transfer of property, the settling of disputes among the Jews using Torah law. They're allowing Jews to use their own set of laws to judge among Jews. All right, Doesn't happen here in America very often either. Sometimes they'll let the Beit Din take control, but within certain parameters. For Jews who don't obey, they also give the rabbis the right to punishment, to put people into cherem, into excommunication. All right? And so it really is a relatively autonomous people with some interference from the government, and it leads to Poland becoming a favorable place for relocation by the mid-1600s, and by that time, essentially 3/4 of all the Jews in the world are living under Polish rule. That is significant. 1573, Zygmunt II, the son of the first, who had extended all his father's policies, he dies childless, and the Polish nobles gather in Warsaw, and they sign a document with representatives from all of the major religions. So you're talking about this Christian involvement here as well, and they pledge to support the tolerance offered by the late king. That's fascinating. Right? The Christians are going along with this. The government's direct involvement in the Jewish community continues to recede. Zygmunt II issues what is known as the Magna Carta for the Jewish communities of Poland, and he grants them continued further and further autonomy. And once this is established and in place, the Jews begin to reorganize internally as well. And you have the establishment of what are known as the Kahal, a board of elders and rabbis within each community that would administer all the Jewish affairs. So you've now got a Jewish government, in a sense, taking care of the Jewish community with the approval of the Polish government. There's a kahal for each community, depending on the size of which would correspond to the population size of the community. It's able to control the economic experiences, the administrative experiences, the judicial affairs of the community. And while the rabbis of each kahal dealt with the Jewish legal issues, the elders were responsible for maintaining the ties to the crown, for ensuring that taxes were collected, because now the good news is Jews are not being extra taxed, but they're still being taxed like everybody else, and turning the money over to the state. They take charge of the upkeep of the community, of the financial responsibilities of the synagogues, of the Talmudic academies, of the cemeteries, and all the other Jewish institutions. Someone has to make sure that they keep running, and you have structures that are being created to do so. As these Kahalim grow, as the communities become more... Yes, sir, Eric. At this early stage, no. No. The question was, were the Jews restricted in economic opportunities, including the ownership of land, etc.? And at this early stage, the answer is no. Again, the nobles and the leaders are welcoming the Jews in as a source of economic opportunity. And so they're trying to get as many Jews as possible and to give them as much opportunity as they can get. Yeah, they are. No, let me not, yeah. There's, many are still in this middleman position, which, as you described, does not play out well later. Yes. Yeah, many are still in that position. All right. Once they grow and a community gets established, what happens is the communities start to become, there's more and more centralization. And so the Kahals all get together, and they have conferences called Va'adot, to better govern all of Poland. So now you've got towns forming states, or for the lack of an equivalent, okay? At the Va'adot, what would happen is the rabbis would settle disputes between the communities, because there's got to be someone overseeing those disputes, okay? They would resolve any kind of disputes between an individual and the Kahal itself as well. So you have a sort of, it's like the court system set up by Yitro in the Bible, all right? And then we have a court, you have the next level appeals court, you have a Supreme Court. They're setting up systems of hierarchy. These Va'adot eventually lead to the creation of what is known as the Council of Four Lands, which becomes the guardian of Jewish interests all over Poland. This further centralization, think of it as it's the Supreme Court of the Jewish world at the time, for lack of a better analogy. From there, there's this creation of a particular position known as the Stadtland, who was the representative of the Polish Jewish community to the Polish leadership. In other words, we're sending our congressmen to go make sure our needs are taken care of. And they would often secure the support of the kings and dignitaries in granting Jews privileges, making sure privileges aren't taken away, making sure taxation doesn't get burdensome, that they can continue to live. And under these circumstances, the Jews of Poland are now flourishing. And you have the birth of the famous European Jewish world. Right? This is the world. These are the people who have come out of suffering and the expulsion from Spain, gone through everything else. They're settling in Poland, and Poland is very welcoming and stays so for at least a period of time. Well, realistically, it really survives in different ways until the Holocaust. Yeah. Expulsions all over. Jews were being expelled from all over Western Europe. That's correct. I just mentioned Spain because that's sort of where we've started with our course, but you're right. It's Austria and Hungary and Germany and et cetera. Some from Britain as well. Yes, and France. All right. So, as Poland, I'm going to switch off here now. Are we good? Any questions so far? Yes, ma'am. Yes. That's what I said, 1,030. As early as 1,030, there were Jews in this land. But again, small numbers. You know, it's this huge influx that is happening during this period of time. You know, when you have a small little, one of the professors I took a class with talked about when you were in Europe, we talked about all these Jewish communities in Europe. And he said, you know, we assume that, well, they're like us. No, the reality is most of these communities were 30 people. They could barely get a minion. All right? You can't, the analogy doesn't work. But at this point, the numbers are growing tremendously. Okay. Poland is now expanding its borders. And we know Poland and Russia keep going back and forth over the Ukraine, and there's all these battles. But Poland is expanding its borders. And many Polish nobles are acquiring new estates in the territories that they're acquiring. These nobles rely on the Jews for help in managing the estates and supervising the work of the peasants. Anybody smell a problem coming? Okay. It's called middle management, and this kind of ends. In the 1560s, there were about 4,000 Jews living in the Ukraine. Not all of Poland, just the Ukrainian area alone. By the 1640s, 80 years later, there were more than 50,000 Jews living there, from 4 to 50, and some suggest maybe as many as 100,000. So you're talking about, yes, were there Jews? Yes, 4,000. Within a short period of time, that 4,000 becomes 100,000. It is a vastly different community. The whole nature of the community is shifting. So, as you can imagine, and probably you already have, Jews were very popular with the Polish leadership, okay? A lot less so with the local peasants who saw the Jews as immigrants looking to take their jobs and all their opportunity. Again, there's an echo. In the spring of 1648, a Ukrainian by the name of Khmelnytsky leads an, boo, right, this is like Haman, everybody boo, get it out of your system, boo, this is right, exactly. Khmelnytsky leads an uprising in which he unites the peasants against the Catholic Polish leaders and the unbelieving Jews with words such as, "You know the wrongs done us by the Poles and the Jews, the oppressions, the evil deeds, the impoverishment. You know and you remember. It's clear we are part of the problem." The Jewish communities, as we talked about, had served as intermediaries between the landlords and the peasants, and that made them targets. Khmelnytsky was a nobleman. He was a Cossack. Cossack comes from a Slavic word meaning free man. The Cossacks were a Slavic people who lived in the Ukraine, organized themselves into these semi-military bands to guard their land and its freedom. Yes, sir. Yes, indeed. They're Orthodox versus Catholics. That's correct. That's correct, yes.
So, is it correct to say that a lot of the nobles were illiterate?
The question is it correct to say that a lot of the nobles were illiterate? I think it's correct to say that most of the population was illiterate. I can't speak to the nobles particularly. The Jews were more likely to be literate because from an early age, the concept of being able to read, to study text was far more important to Jews, okay? Again, we always want to make the distinction between that which is innate, just because, well, the Jews are better, therefore they read, as opposed to the social situation that would have demanded it of them, okay? That's a completely different thing. Originally, these Cossacks were small groups of fishermen and hunters and lawless adventurers who came together and they were trying to escape their original social class. They're trying to move up. The American dream in Poland. The estate world that they're coming from is useful to the Polish kings because what they want from them, remember they've become military bands, they want border protection. No jokes, no political comments, none allowed. Okay? In exchange for that, the Polish nobility grants them many opportunities and freedoms and privileges. This would make sense. However, the problem is the numbers are growing at such a pace it grows out of the control of the kings. And you have an influx of population of the peasants that are looking for a better way of life, again, like everybody else, and they want to gain more. And numerous times there by the year 1638, there are rebellions, small little rebellions that are happening all over the place. In an effort to control those rebellions, as you can imagine would take place, the nobility responds by what? Curtailing the rights of those people. Right? So you can imagine it's well received, and it continues to grow, and what happens is you have this fomenting of anger that just continues to build. The next decade between 1638 and 1648 is relatively quiet. In a sense, it's known as a golden tranquility era. But although that's happening on the surface, underneath is happening all the anger that's going to blow up. There are a number of issues which further complicate things. Number one, you have not only the peasants, but the burgher class begins to see that they're not getting that middleman position that the Jews are taking from them. Okay? And they start to feel disadvantaged in terms of the presence of the Jews. Religion, as Eric pointed, I think so. Who has the question about Orthodox? Yes? Religion becomes another contributing factor because the Poles are Catholic and the Ukrainians are East Orthodox Jews. No, Christians, okay? They belong to the Greek Orthodox Church. It's no wonder there that what you've got, the Cossacks are seeing themselves as the defenders of the peasants. They're diametrically opposed to the Poles in social class, in political affinity, in religious beliefs. These are the other in that world. And with Cossack leadership, it becomes a peasant war with the landowners with religious undertones. That's what's going on. 1648, big year. Bogdan Khmelnytsky, the leader of the Cossacks, incites a rebellion. He successfully organizes a militia. He reaches out to the communities around him. He establishes an alliance with the Khan of Crimea and establishes a pact with the Tartars who agreed to aid in his rebellion. So he's gone out and he's gotten allies in this process. All of them are viewing the Poles and the Jews as invaders of the land, and they need to be ousted. Jewish history, this initiator, Khmelnytsky, of these terrible massacres becomes known, and he's been branded as Khmel the Wicked. The first large-scale massacre takes place in Nemirav, in which the Cossacks penetrate the city in the disguise of Polish soldiers. The vast majorities of these massacres occur in the months of in 1648 between May and November, and those Jews who don't manage to escape the approaching Polish army often are killed. They're converted to Christianity by force, or they're seized and sold into slavery. Synagogues are destroyed. Property is looted. The toll of dead alone in this revolt throughout Polish lands is staggering. Again, we're talking about all the Polish lands. Some suggest as many as 25% of the world's Jewish population died in those revolts. Between 100 and 500,000 Jews. It's huge. Other than the Holocaust and the destruction of the temple, numbers-wise, percentage-wise, this is the greatest tragedy in Jewish history.
Were they killing Poles too?
Yes, they were killing Poles, yes. According to the accounts that have been discovered, Jews suffered in the most merciless fashion in the onslaught. The stories about victims include burial of the living, cutting to pieces of the living, forcing Jews to kill one another. Reading number 14. And these readings are long, but they're worthwhile, I promise you. Reading 14, the abyss of despair. Estates were devastated, manor houses reduced to ashes, and human beings barbarously done to death. The victims were flayed and burned alive, mutilated and left to the agony of a lingering death. Infants were slit like fish or slaughtered at the breasts of their mothers or cast alive into wells. Women were ripped open and then sewed up again with live cats thrown into their bowels. Many, married or unmarried, were violated before the eyes of their mensfolk, and those that were comely were carried away. These persons died cruel and bitter deaths. Some were skinned alive, and their flesh was thrown to the dogs. Some had the hands and limbs chopped off, and their bodies thrown on the highways only to be trampled by wagons and crushed by horses. Some children were pierced by spears, roasted on the fire, and then brought to their mothers to be eaten. It's October 7 on steroids in many ways, in terms of numbers, yes. Yeah, this is not a war. This is not one would describe as a war. This is barbarity. 1648. In the wake of what this essentially is beyond the words of catastrophe, the Jewish community goes into mourning, and they declare national mourning in memory of the victims. And an annual fast is established on the 20th of Sivan. It's gotten lost. And it represents the first attack in Nemirav, where Jews died in masses. So this is a liminal moment in Jewish history. This really is. This is not, there's towns that are killed. This is not the Crusades. This is serious numbers. By comparison, the Crusades were inconsequential. This next reading is long. I ask you to bear with me. The oppressor Khmelnytsky may his name be blotted out, Yimach Shemo. It's the same thing we say about Haman. It's the same thing we say about all the terrible people in history, heard that many Jews had assembled in the holy community of Nemirav, and that they had a great deal of silver and gold with them. Because of the Cossacks, many Jews came from the countryside to the fortress of Nemirav. He also knew that the congregation of Nemirav itself was distinguished for its riches. It was once a great and very important community, full of justice and the abode of righteousness, a community of scholars and writers, but now they have been murdered. Accordingly, Khmelnytsky, may his name be blotted out, sent a certain leader, an enemy of the Jews, and about 600 swordsmen with him against this honored congregation. In addition, he wrote to the magistrates of the city that they should help with this band. To this, the citizens readily responded that they would help them with all their might and main and money, not so much because of their love of the Cossacks, but because of their hatred of the Jews. It came to pass on a Wednesday, the 20th Sivan, that was the day they established as the memorial, right, that the Cossacks drew near to the city of Nemirav. When the Jews saw the troops from afar, they were frightened, though as yet they did not know whether they were Polish or Cossack. Nonetheless, all the Jews went with their wives and infants with their silver and gold into the fortress and locked and barred its doors, ready to fight them. What did the scoundrels, these Cossacks, do? They made flags like the Poles, for there is no other way to distinguish between the Polish and the Cossack forces except through their banners. Now the people of the town, although they knew of this trick, nevertheless called to the Jews in the fortress, "Open the gates. This is a Polish army, which has come to save you from your enemies should they appear." Trojan horse at its best. The Jews who were standing on the walls, seeing that the banners were like the flags of the Polish forces and believing that the townspeople were telling them the truth, immediately opened the gates to them. No sooner had the gates been opened than the Cossacks entered with drawn swords, and the townspeople too with swords, lances, and scythes, and some only with clubs, and they killed the Jews in huge numbers. They raped women and young girls, but some of the women and maidens jumped into the moat near the fortress in order that the Gentiles should not defile them, and they were drowned in the water. Many of the men who were able to swim also jumped into the water and swam, thinking that they could save themselves from slaughter. The Russians swam after them with their swords and their scythes, and they killed them in the water. Some of the enemy, too, kept on shooting with their guns into the moat, killing them. Finally, the water was red with the blood of the slain. The number of those murdered and drowned in the holy community of Nemirav was about 6,000. Those met all sorts of terrible deaths, as has already been described. May God avenge their blood. These massacres leave a really what is a scar on the psyche and Jewish collective memory. You can only imagine when you go through something like this and you see people murdered and treated this way, it's not just, yes, it's the loss of the people and the tragedy that goes with it, it's your identity that also gets just trampled in process. Who am I? How is this possible? And it's remembered as one of the darkest periods in Jewish history until the 20th century. As in early years, other periods, the effect of this calamity is to reinforce essentially the irrational, the apocalyptic elements of Judaism, and to make Jews hypersensitive to any possible signs of messianic deliverance. There's a sense of loss of hope. It's got to come from somewhere. It's not going to come internally. The Spanish Inquisition, the expulsion, had intensified the Kabbalistic dynamics by bringing to the surface this eschatological element that focuses on the return to Zion, the Messiah coming, and in the face of so much suffering, what the Kabbalah originally intended was a sort of a mystic way of knowing God is transitioned from that which is mysticism into history, into a historical force, a means of hastening Israel's redemption. The greater the distress, the more urgently deliverance is awaited. Messianism sweeps away both the poor and the rich, learned and the ignorant. People recognize the danger, they're experiencing it on an ongoing basis, they're feeling hopeless, and they're turning to messianism. All right, before I go further, I'm about to jump into Shabtai Tzvi, but before I do, any thoughts or comments in terms of Chmielnitsky? Hi there. Yes, sir. It is. It is, because it keeps happening. Every time it just keeps happening. What's that? Well, right, there's fewer and fewer each time the numbers go down, and so there's more and more. Yeah, right. Yes, ma'am.
Was this happening across Poland? I mean, we were talking about a certain region.
No, this is across. These events cross all of Poland. Well, I just did. Yeah, so the question was this all across Poland? And the answer is yes, it was all across Poland. It wasn't just in Ukraine or some specific area. This is happening across. There's
More than 6,000.
Well, 6,000 in Nemirov, in the one city. Right. No, as many as 100 to, the numbers are somewhere between 100 and 500,000 killed, yes. Well, first of all, the Cossacks. The question was, were the Cossacks? Did they move out from Ukraine into the larger Poland, or was it just the people who live in it? The answer is both. And the Cossacks weren't only located in the Ukraine. It's just Chmielnitsky and his particular band was there, but this is a group of people looking for economic opportunity. I'm being as kind as I can be. Okay, and so they're feeling poverty-stricken, and so they're striking out at the other. Yes, sir.
So the Cossacks can be compared legitimately to the Wild West bandits that we see depicted in westerns?
Yeah, the answer is in some ways yes, but in most ways no. The reason I'd say that is that the Wild West bandits, as you've described, were individuals. This is a collective. This is a group of people together seeing a mission of getting rid of the other.
I realize the communication wasn't what we have today, but did the latter towns get any advance warning and leave? I mean, did they have any opportunities to?
All right, so again, I'm going to repeat the question. Obviously they didn't have the levels of kind of communication we have today. With advance notice, did some of the towns? The answer, I can't tell you for sure, but of course. I mean, who's not going to do that? The answer is yes. Without knowledge of yes, the answer is yes. Okay? What's that? Right, you're constantly on the run. So you run from one place and you get thrown out, or you're on the run from the Cossacks and you run to another place. My great-grandmother describes running from the Cossacks in the 1800s, great-grandmother, late 1800s, and the stories and she told them. They're personal stories, they're real stories. So the question, again, I'm repeating it for people online, was this centralized within the urban centers, or did it spread to the larger rural areas as well? Look, the majority of Jews were in the urban centers because that's where economic opportunity lied, number one. And number two, as we described, as they heard about the approaching, they gathered together in the cities to try to put up walls. You don't want to be outside the wall. Right? So you gather together, and so whether or not they started in the city, by the time the attack came, they were behind a wall trying to protect themselves. Go ahead. They didn't, right.
rapidly now, and it's very influential. So, does your neighbor farmer hate you and want to kill you?
So,
Or are you still just on a personal relationship basis?
okay, so again, as I understand the question, it is that, was the hatred outside of the city? In the cities, there was economic competition, and that obviously led to all sorts of hatred. Did that extend to the farmlands where Jews were far less prevalent? I don't know that any particular study has been done on that. I have to imagine it where we were less of a threat, the hatred was less so, particularly in a world where there's less communication, where it isn't getting out there. But that doesn't mean it didn't exist. It just probably wasn't as prevalent. There you go. Okay. Right. And so if they're going out into the world as tax collectors, et cetera, and they're the middlemen, then that's, in a sense, that is the communication that's getting spread. What's that? The peasants didn't own the land, but they were being taxed nonetheless. Right. Right. And who were the collectors of the tax? Us. On behalf of the Polish government. We weren't getting the money. We were the collectors, and we would get our... Right. That's correct. I saw a hand here first. No? Okay. Yes, Gail.
Yeah, it wasn't merely collection of taxes, but Jews had to make a living off that, and so they had their own upcharge for
Right.
collecting the taxes.
Right, well, this is true in loans and true of taxes as well. The money is coming from the government, and so the Jews are up, because this is how they're making their living, they're upping the rate or upping the tax rate so that they could make a living off it, so their taxes are being increased. Always a very popular behavior.
Christians were not allowed.
Right, right. I'm going to go on. Yes, I don't want to get, all right? So let me apologize. You're right. Shabtai Tzvi. I can't let you leave here without Shabtai Tzvi. By the 1600s, Kabbalistic thought is it's almost as if, well, we've got it complete. The Messiah is waiting in the wings. They're suffering throughout. And this sense of this messianic period is uniting people across two continents. May 31, 1665, as if on cue, the Messiah appears. He's proclaimed as such in Gaza, and it's a character by the name of Shabtai Tzvi. Before going into my notes, let me just tell you that Shabtai Tzvi had an inroads into the Jewish community that Jesus could only have hoped for. His popularity among Jews was extensive. He is charismatic. He had followers in Europe. He had followers in the Ottoman Empire. He came from a well-off Sephardic Jewish family. He was educated in Talmud and Torah. He grew up in a world of Kabbalistic thought. And so the way of thinking was just there. Initially, though, the movement doesn't really catch on. Shabtai Tzvi, as a matter of fact, who's an incredibly odd bird. All right, the Inquirer should show up at his door. He was flogged in 1658 in Constantinople for transgressing religious law. Here we go. Shabtai Tzvi invited all of the local rabbis to a banquet in which he married the Torah. Instead of attributing this action to his great holiness, they accused him of madness. And in case you think I'm nuts, his own words say the following in 1666. He identifies himself as the bridegroom coming out of his chamber, the husband of the dearly beloved Torah, who is the most beautiful and lovely lady. It also seems that he brought a very large fish, which he dressed up as if it were a baby, and putting it into a cradle and inviting all the rabbis of the town to come see it. Shabtai explained that the fish symbolized the astrological prediction that the Messiah would be born under the sign of Pisces, and the cradle signified the nurturing of Israel's redemption. Nathan the prophet, Nathan was, if you think of Paul as the one who put Jesus on the scene, Nathan the prophet is the one who put Shabtai Tzvi on the scene. He's one of the great marketers of history. All right, in the year 1658, he wrote, "The Messiah will celebrate all three festivals, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, in 1 week, so as to atone for all the sins ever committed by Israel. Then God will give them a new law and new commandments to repair the world. In 1658, he shall bless God who permits that which is forbidden." And then just for good measure, he appoints Rabbi Jacob Nahara, who had been his host in Gaza, to the ancient post of high priest in the temple, because he's the Messiah and is going to rebuild the temple. January 1666, we have a note written by a Dutchman to friends of his in Holland, in which he says, "The rabbis of Jerusalem were so angry at Shabtai's blasphemies that they wanted to kill him." A public letter was later written. It said, "The man who spreads these innovations is a heretic, and whoever kills him will be accounted as one who saved many souls, and the hand that strikes him down without delay will be blessed in the eyes of God and man." I hear echoes of Yitzhak Rabin, right? Permission was given, kill him. September 65, the message for the larger populations. Now, so far we've kind of looked at what the rabbis are responding, right? The message of a Messiah in the face of hopelessness nonetheless begins to spread to the entire world. At first, there are emissaries sent only to Egypt and to Italy. But then there are letters that go out to Constantinople, and it spreads to all the Islamic world. In a matter of a month, it's now spreading as well to the Christian Europe. It arrives in Italy in October and November, Germany, Holland, England, the rest of the continent. It is accepted by the large population of Jews willingly and enthusiastically. Anybody who opposed him, and this includes, by the way, many rabbis bought into this as well. It was probably the majority bought into this as well. Anybody who opposed it had their voice silenced quickly. They had to remain silent in synagogues where brachot, blessings, were offered in honor of the coming of the Messiah. Israel finally had its Messiah, a prophet of God, a restoration of biblical leadership. Understand how large and how well received this is. The numbers are enormous. This is not 10%. This is not 20%. You're probably looking at 50% of the Jewish world or more who buys the messianism of Shabtai Tzvi. Reading number 16, and this is an undertaking, bear with me, but again, I hope the readings are worthwhile. In the month of Kislev, in the year December 1665, Shabtai Tzvi arrived in Smyrna and was received with great honor there, too. He went to the home of his brothers, Rabbi Eliah and Rabbi Yosef, and although it was made known to the Basha, the Turkish authority, the Qadi, the judge of the city, and all the Turks, that the Jews believed that he was the Messiah, not one Turk opened his mouth and chirped. In other words, they didn't in any way object. When the king, Shabtai Tzvi, sat in his home, many Jews came to kiss his hand, as was the custom of great individuals. There were also people not from the nation who came to honor and exalt him, so that all day and night his gates did not close, bringing to him masses of people to serve him and to do his will. Upon seeing these developments, the Chacham Rabbi Eliah, his brother, not believing that Shabtai Tzvi was the Messiah, And fearing that, God forbid, something disastrous would befall both this and other communities under the rule of the Turkish Sultan because of Tzvi, thought it would be better for him to die alone rather than have the community be destroyed with him. One day, when he came upon Tzvi alone in a room, he approached him with an unsheathed sword in his hand, waiting to strike him. God forbid. But our master glared at him, and he was stricken with convulsions, falling before him as if one who is dead and unable to cause him any harm. After this event, he began to do awful, strange things. He would utter the tetragrammaton, which is the name of Yud-Heh-Vav, how it's actually pronounced. And the actual name of God is the high priest would use, okay? He would eat forbidden fats. He would do other things against God and his Torah. He urged others to do likewise. On Thursday, which was the third day of Hanukkah in that particular year, he went in the morning to the Al-Ghazi synagogue wearing royal garments. He began to write songs with tunes that all the members of the synagogue were shocked to hear. So, for example, let me just give you an example. This would shock everybody in the room. We do, Adon Olam Hashem Al. Anybody recognize Silent Night? Right, thank you. Right. If I did that, I don't have to wait to June to retire. Okay? All right. On Friday, the Chacham Volanti arrived and testified that he was indeed the Messiah. On the Holy Shabbat, he prolonged his prayers with extra supplications. He then went on to the Portuguese synagogue, and because many of them did not believe in him, they locked the doors. In a great fury, he sent one of his followers to bring an axe, and he knocked on the doors on Shabbat until they opened, and he entered the synagogue. The congregation was reciting the Nishmat prayer. He told them to stop praying, and he began to recite supplications until the prescribed time for the morning prayers had passed. What you need to know with that is the Shema in particular is technically supposed to be said by a particular time of day, and what he did is he made sure they couldn't. All right. He then declared, "Today you are exempt from prayer. Only read the Shema without the surrounding blessings." He took a copy of the Torah from his bag and stated that it was that the Chumash, the copy of the Chumash, is holier than the Torah scroll. He proceeded to call up to the Torah his elder brother, Rabbi Eliah. He called him as if he were a Kohen, which he wasn't, and dubbed him the Sultan of Turkey. His second brother, he dubbed as Caesar of the Romans. He then called many men in an alternative manuscript, and also women, which really must have shocked the heck out of them, okay, and divided the kingdom amongst them. He forced them all to pronounce God's real name. The next day, those who did not believe in him reported to him to the Qadi, who was the judge of the city, and told him of all these evil things. The Qadi sent for him, and when he came before him, he was overtaken by convulsions and thus treated him with great honor. He then sent for those people who spoke against him, and they feared for their lives, and they fled, and they hid. Despite the fact that he did these strange acts, his name spread throughout the world as the Holy Messiah, and Rabbi Nathan was known as a true prophet. Almost all of Israel believed him without any sign or miracle. Their reputation also spread among the uncircumcised, meaning the Christians, and among the Turks, and none opened their mouth in protest, for the trembling of God had fallen upon them. As a result, a great wave of repentance was aroused among the Jews in all their settlements. And from Eretz Yisrael, they sent a Tikkun, a Kabbalistic liturgical text, to be recited night and day. And they published it also in Mantua and Amsterdam, a great city of wise men and scribes. And many take breaks throughout the week to stand in the synagogue for a day and night to recite prayers, supplications, and petitions. Men, women, children immersed themselves repeatedly in the mikveh. They gave charity. Certainly such repentance had never occurred, even in the time of Mordecai and Esther. They closed their stores and virtually did not involve themselves in the business. There's no reason to do business if the Messiah is coming. The Edomites and Ishmaelites, meaning the Christians and the Muslims, saw everything and said nothing against the Jews, but rather treated them with increased love and affection. In the month of Shvat, our master put on royal garments of gold and held a Pentateuch in one hand and a golden scepter in the other, as was the practice of the great kings. He went forth from his house with some 500 Jews following him. They walked through the main street of the city and the byways of Smyrna and proclaimed loudly, "Long live the king, our master, long live our master, the king." The Turks saw and heard what was said and did not respond, but rather protested themselves upon the ground before him. Prostrate, what did I say? They didn't protest, they prostrated. Even when the matter became known to the Basha, the Qadi, and the municipal authorities, no one opened their mouths to chirp. That's obviously a repeating phrase. And no one caused harm to the Jews, neither bodily nor monetarily. Following this, prophecy came to many men, women, and children in Smyrna, Constantinople, and other places, and all of them had one message that they testified to: Shabtai Tzvi, the Messiah of God, of the God of Israel. This was the nature of prophecy that befell the people at that time. A great sleepiness descended upon them, and they would fall to the ground like the dead who had no longer had the breath of life within them. After half an hour, a spirit would speak through their mouths, but their lips did not move. They would proclaim hymns of praise and consolation, and all would declare, Shabtai Tzvi, the Messiah of the God of Jacob. Following this, they would rise, having no recollection of what they had done or said. All right, you have a sense of the fervor that has just conquered the entire people. This is a people that's been suffering and suffering and suffering and is pleading for a messianic figure. One walks in the door and it's like, just thank God.
This is after the worst thing that has happened to the Jews.
This is after Khmelnytsky. Right.
So, why didn't that same fervor about a Messiah coming?
Oh, it did. So, you ever hear of the land of Israel? Okay, as a matter of fact, in Birkat HaMazon, every week we sing, Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu, that Israel is the beginning of the restoration of Israel and the Messianic times. Okay? So, oh yes, it did. It may not be as, we're talking 100 years, 80 years, 90 years later, and so it's somewhat muted at this point. But in that time, that was absolutely the perception. Israel came into existence in response to the Holocaust was a common claim.
But in that comparison, it would seem to me that the Orthodox world of Israel now is compared to what all these people are doing back in the
Well, they certainly were far more unified than we are. We have 900 movements. They didn't have 900 movements. I don't know that they were Orthodox, they were traditional. Okay, and if you remember, we talked about a community in which they could excommunicate anybody who deviated. So the deviation it wasn't great. People were unified.
Because Israel is so secular.
Today.
Now, I see nothing secular in the minds of the people. After this, it's a horrible thing.
So the question is, in today's world, we see a lot of secularism. In this time, you don't see that happening in terms of the 1600s. That's because there is no such thing as secularism in the 1600s. Prior to the Reformation and the Enlightenment, there's only religious world. If you don't want to be a Jew, you have to be a Christian. You don't want to be a Jew, you have to be a Muslim. There is no other. There's no option. If you get excommunicated by Jews, you have no way to earn a living because no one's going to do business with you. So you find another religion where they will do business with you. That's not obviously not the case today. Right. In, that's correct. That's correct. Do you feel the pain of Israel? Right. After Shabtai Tzvi. Well, you know, in certain ways, again, it's easier for Jews in much of the Muslim world at that time than it is in the Christian world. There's no question about that. But that doesn't mean, remember, they're living as dhimmi. They're living as second-class citizens. They're living in a world in which it's not perfect, and the people down the street in Poland are being killed. God only knows whose relatives are there, who went where, etc. So it's not as if the impact isn't being felt. Well, yeah, for sure. We talked about that. Yeah, they went from Poland, probably not. But there was probably trade going on between them. All right, you know, the Jews were the traders because they could go from Traders, okay? They could go from land to land because they didn't have the restrictions between the Christianity and Islam.
When he says people not of our nation, he's referring to people who were not Jews.
Right.
Okay. And I have another question. They claim that he was descended from David?
Well, yeah, the claim was that Shabtai Tzvi was descended from David. That's your question? Yeah, yes, and there's no way around the fact that when you make a claim that someone is the Messiah, you have to, by definition, somehow link them to David. Because the entire concept of a Messiah comes from the book of Samuel, in which there's a promise made that there will be a king, a descendant of David, who will sit on the throne for all time, and then there's not. And so that belief gets shifted to it will return at some point and be permanent. Therefore, it has to be a descendant of David.
So how did this story end?
Wow.
Did he finally get executed sometime?
So actually, if he had been executed, it might have been easier.
Yes.
So at a certain point, he starts to make claims about putting on the Sultan's crown, and in other words, and the words, you know, it's like saying, I think I'm going to be president. And when you say this, the person sitting in that seat generally is not thrilled to hear it. He gets off a boat, and he gets pulled in. They arrest him, put him in chains, and bring him before. And he's ultimately given the option of, you can convert, we'll give you all these riches, or we have an alternative for you. We could kill you. He chooses to convert. You can imagine in a world in which 50% of the world believes this is their Messiah, the Jewish world, and he converts, the devastation that descends upon the people.
Do a lot of them convert?
What's that? Not a lot, but there are those who then Nathan, his prophet, says that out of that, this was all part of God's plan all along, and that some of them begin to convert as well, where they outwardly accept Islam, but internally continue the practices of Shabtai Tzvi. They become known as the Don Meh. All right? They ultimately have, just through assimilation, have essentially disappeared over time. What is significant in this process, why don't we know more about this? The rabbis closed ranks. They were terrified that the Turks would begin a witch hunt that would go after anyone who had supported Shabtai Tzvi as the enemy. And so, and they were looking for a revolt. And so the rabbis made every effort possible to rewrite or unwrite history All right, they pretended that it didn't happen. They got rid of all the records. Any kind of community records of it were destroyed, and it was completely downplayed as a survival technique. And therefore, it isn't out there. Many of us don't know it. There's been a deliberate suppression from the 1600s, okay, of these events. It was dangerous to leave it out there. Plus, there's another factor. And that is when people go through something like that and they believe the hope is coming and it's taken away from them, the sheer devastation, the sheer loss of hope is unbelievable. And so they're trying to take people and guide them by the hand and help them through this and say this really wasn't all that important. Let's go back to real life. Let's go back to real life. This brings to a close, really, the Middle Ages. This for Jews. This brings to a close the experiences of the expulsions. We've gone through being thrown out of one land after another. We've gone to different places and then gotten expelled again. We end up in this place called Poland and the Ottoman Empire where there's life. From there you have this hatred that develops because the Jews have moved in and taken over as economic competition. They're immigrants. And you have uprisings such as Khmelnytsky and then Messianic fervor. And that all collapses. Into that world comes the Enlightenment. Into that world comes a whole different way of thinking, and we enter the modern times. The Baal Shem Tov too, yeah. Yes, sir. There still are, yeah, we're talking small pockets. Are there small pockets? Yes, that exist, but they are so far from the mainstream that can you say it survived? On some level.
But how long was it?
Oh, a couple of years at most. Yeah, I think it's with 2-3 years.
Yeah, a friend of mine, his son, was studying in Turkey, met a girl. They got married here in Houston by Rabbi Radinsky. She styled herself as a Sabbathean. And their family had certain Jewish traditions. And they were delighted that their daughter met a Jewish guy. And Rabbi Radinsky converted her to Judaism. So there still are Sabbatheans. She was from Izmir.
Okay. All right. But again, at this point, it's finding a pearl in the middle of, right. All right, any other questions? Yeah, sir.
Say about 3 years.
In other words, what was the time of the reign? How long did his, in a sense, reign last? Right, from 65 to 67, 68, you know, basically, he's converted relatively quickly yeah. So it's short-lived, but its impact is tremendous, and it really ends an era. It changes the way people are thinking. Yeah, he was a fraud. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Do we know what happened to Prophet Nathan?
The answer is I'm sure we do, I don't. Let me admit my ignorance here. But there are further, as someone mentioned earlier, there were further messiahs who were Jacob Frank and a few others who arose during this period as well. They didn't nearly have the penetration into the Jewish community, but there still are Frankists out there.
When we were in Israel, we saw signs that had pictures of Schneerson.
Schneerson. Yeah, Schneerson, again, within the Lubavitcher world, Schneerson, amongst many within, not all, is considered the Messiah, and he too will return. You hear an echo. Yeah, right, you hear the echoes. When many of you have heard me tell the following story. We have to rationalize it, the sociologist who went out into a field where a spaceship was coming to take away true believers. How many of you heard this from me before? Okay, not many, okay. A sociologist in the 1950s sees a report in the New York Times that there's a spaceship coming to save the true believers at midnight on a particular day. So he decides, I'm going out there, I gotta see this, right? Midnight comes, guess what doesn't?
Spaceship.
Right, spaceship doesn't show up. So how do the people who are standing there in a parking lot at midnight waiting for a spaceship interpret the events? They have a few options. One is, oh my God, we're idiots. That's not the way people respond. Rather, it becomes, because of our true faith, the world was saved. That's cognitive dissonance at its best. That is how human beings respond when their hopes, when the Messiah they were praying for turns out not to have achieved world peace. You go through cognitive dissonance and you reinterpret the facts and turn it on its head.
If they were from Deuteronomy, they would say we didn't have enough faith.
You didn't have enough faith. Right, he didn't come because we were flawed.
Right, that's the Jewish.
Right, right. All right, so yes. All right, on that note, I'm going to say thank you all. It's been a pleasure.